Thanks, Allison. My name is Chris Sutton. I am the Community Risk Reduction Unit Manager for OSFM. We're very happy to bring you today's topic, which is public safety power shutoff, which is fairly new to the state of Oregon, but uh, certainly a tool that the providers use to help mitigate risk of fire ignition from public utilities. And with that, we're happy to host our partner agencies here today with the Public Utilities Commission and the Department of Human Services. So with that, I'd like to introduce Lisa Gorsuch, our partner with the Public Utilities Commission, to go ahead and speak with us about Public Safety Power Shutoff, or PSPS. Lisa, take it away.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you to Allison as well. As Chris mentioned, my name is Lisa Gorsuch. I'm the Emergency Preparedness Manager in Safety, Reliability, and Security for the Oregon Public Utility Commission. We are an agency that has regulatory authority fully over 3 utilities. They are our 3 largest providers, which include Idaho Power, Pacific Power, and Portland General Electric. And then we have 38 additional providers that are COUs, or what are known as consumer-owned utilities, that include cooperatives, municipalities, and PUDs, or people's utility districts, which we have definite safety interaction with, but otherwise are not policy or rate regulated. Very important distinction. And I'm going to do a quick disclaimer today. I did provide a PSPS presentation, fairly brief, at the kickoff meeting that was hosted by Oregon Department of Emergency Management on, I believe, June 7th. Everything starts to run together, and we're heading into what could be a very tough fire season, and there's a junket where I've been asked to present at many meetings on PSPS, and I know we draw from a small pool. So my goal and hope today is to provide you with helpful, useful information and not talk at you so long that you're not able to ask important questions. And with the help of OSFM, that is so graciously hosting this meeting and presentation today, there are additional materials that they will be putting in the link and sending out to participants or attendees that I hope will be quick reference guides for you and helpful. So thank you. Next slide, please. In the past, while to Chris's point, PSPSs, or public safety power shutoffs, are fairly new. I think we're all at a point where we know what those are. And I'm including, and don't want to take a whole lot of time, I have spoken about this a number of times, but the PSPS minimum requirements for the 3 IOUs, or investor-owned utilities, that we at the OPUC have full regulation over, can be found in the first bullet point here and link, and they are not obnoxiously long rules. These are minimum requirements, by no means the only expectations, but they do help frame PSPS. And I know everybody on this call, we're all busy, but I want to make sure that you know what's available and how to access it. And then I won't take too long, but again, as far as the wildfire mitigation plans, while per statute and per Oregon administrative rule, only 3 of our 41 providers are required to execute PSPSs if they are identified as necessary to save life, structures, and infrastructure. 38 of our COUs also have currently approved, through their own governing bodies, wildfire mitigation plans. And the second bullet gives you an easy link where you have access based on your jurisdiction to those plans. They're available. Anybody could search and find them online, but who has the time, hopefully that will be helpful for you. Want to talk to you about utility exercises and other engagement with response partners. I'll touch on that lightly as we go through. and community outreach meetings. Uh, we also had the, if we're going to see the glass half full, we had a PSPS event in September 2022 that provided a lot of information with lessons learned. We can plan, we can exercise till the cows come home, but until you have an incident like that, which was my worst nightmare, which was PSPS in multiple counties, multiple providers, and an active wildfire that was encroaching on Oak Ridge in Lane County. Thank God we had a pretty good outcome, an excellent outcome, no loss of life, all of that. But it gave us, again, we never want those incidents, but the opportunity to learn was excellent and to demonstrate that, yes, this is possible and we have to be ready for it. And then this is really important. I believe all or most of you, based on who we have access to with distribution lists at the local and state level, there is a really important workshop coming up, and I believe the majority, anybody I could share it with. There is the Oregon Wildfire Electric Collaborative. This describes a little bit about what initiated that, and on an upcoming slide, I'll talk about that opportunity to participate. And let me start by saying here too, and I can avoid it later on in the presentation, that if due to your very busy schedule, you're unable to engage and participate at the time, all of those previous OWEC workshops and this one, no different, will be recorded, posted, and available to listen to at a later time if and when you have time and interest. Next slide, please. So utility wildfire community outreach meetings and utility exercises. We are at a point now where we, essentially last week and into this week, there have been community outreach meetings that I have been attending. If I can quickly touch on this is an evolution. We're all learning and getting better. This is specifically speaking to Portland General Electric. Their outreach meetings last year, which was the first year it was a requirement, there was low attendance. There hadn't been, and this is in no way to judge or condemn PGE, but not the right coordination and extension for ask of support with public safety partners. This year, it was amazing. Let me describe Sheridan on Monday, that was held at the Sheridan High School. ODF was there. We had representation from Yamhill County, our Yamhill County Emergency Manager. ODHS as the ESF6 was there in full force. The coordination and collaboration to best serve the community, in addition to just PGE, but all the public safety partners involved, or many of them, that could address the, both educate and address the community's questions and concerns. That was outstanding. So we see this improving year over year, and it will only get better from here. Exercises, there is an upcoming exercise, PGE, on the 21st, and anybody can reach out to me. They're quite good at including public safety partners in the invites. Anybody can reach out, and if we have so many individual parts and pieces that may want to be in attendance. A lot of times it requires in-person attendance. There are virtual opportunities always, but you can in fact miss out on some of the critical information. On the flip side, there is a limited amount of room for engagement in person, so that's a delicate balance. But please reach out if you're interested in how you might be able to participate in that. Next slide, please. So the community outreach meetings are a little different. Pacific Power holds them following fire season. They're annually, so the timing isn't necessarily right or wrong. It's just a difference in how that's executed. And as far as their tabletops and exercises, those have also taken place. And I'm happy to fill you in on how those went and any lessons learned. Next slide, please. Not sure. I'm going to go to my own copy so I can keep it moving. I don't want to eat up anybody else's time. I'm so sorry. So can everyone hear me okay?
Yep, you're still loud and clear, Lisa.
Okay. So next screen if you have the ability. Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. Um so communication during a PSPS. Um, this can be found in the wildfire mitigation plans for the providers, the electric providers. And this, again, let me clearly state, this is the 3 investor-owned utilities that are subject to these rules. That would be Idaho Power, Pacific Power, and Portland General Electric. They're clearly defined here. Again, it's minimum requirements. But as far as the more detailed information on how they build on that and execute within their service territory and possibly your jurisdiction, depending on where you serve, is in their wildfire mitigation plans, which again, I provided links in this presentation. Plus, I have included PDFs of the plans in the supplementary information that I've provided to be emailed out to attendees or sent via the link here today. But I think it's critical to know that notification, once a PSPS at a high level has been determined through whether we've hit the criteria and the forecasted weather that would indicate a PSPS may be necessary, and they're in a PSPS watch, the utilities, then begins the communication protocol on that. And what is critical, I would think, to many of the partners attending this presentation today is that there is a diehard effort, and it's even named in the rules, to alert public safety partners, obviously first and foremost the impacted community. By community, I mean community emergency management, before the customers and public at large are notified, which they need to be notified as quickly and reasonably as possible. But public safety partners, critical facilities, others need to be notified so they are prepared to get the landslide of calls, questions, etc. Never mind the prep time needed to fulfill your role in the resources you provide during a PSPS. And then notification, contact to the customers that will be impacted will go out from the utility. Now, there is always a lot of confusion about this, and I feel like I'm taking up a lot of time, but it's important to know that will not be using up valuable emergency alerting, capability, as we could have an active fire where we could have a level 3 evacuation, and we can't have the companies using up limited capacity on our telecommunications infrastructure, sending out a PSPS notification that definitely isn't as important as a go now level 3 evacuation. So that coordination is done with our state and local emergency managers, but the company has many different platforms and ways in which they notify their customers that will be impacted by a PSPS. And I urge you to take a look at these as well as look. And it is easy to consume, again, in the wildfire mitigation plans, as they have a great table of contents, and you can zero in on exactly what you're looking for versus reading over 100 pages of things you may not be interested in. Next slide, please. So, of course, there are ongoing communications that are required, and this is what I was alluding to just a moment ago. About how we coordinate and consider capacity for notifications, and how we don't want immediate life safety alerting to be impeded by someone being notified that their power will go out. While that is a critical issue, not as critical as someone getting out before they're in danger of losing their lives due to fire. Next slide, please. This is really a high level summary, and I hate to read it to you, but I'm going to zip through really quickly, but it really just provides how the utilities, again, the investor owns that are listed here, how they consider the impacts, how they activate and notify in order, again, pre-identified critical facilities, partner utilities, public safety partners. Then they are coordinating to notify their customers. Then they're working with, again, local and state partners on meeting the needs of those who will be impacted with implementing community resource centers and identifying where to place those, how best to serve the community based on where it is and the makeup of that community. And then the conditions that are monitored, because while we want the utility to support, for example, with CRCs, we cannot make our utilities Red Cross. We need them to turn off power when it could risk life and property and infrastructure. But then we need them with the limited support that they provide and great coordination to get back to the business of, once the weather event is over, they need to patrol lines and get that service back on as safely and quickly as possible. So this just explains that they are monitoring the conditions and that they are patrolling lines and fixing any damage so that they can re-energize as soon as possible. Next slide, please. And then again, community resource centers, there is a great deal of confusion about whether these are required, that the utilities have to provide them. They don't, but they do choose to, and they put them in their wildfire mitigation plans. Once they're in their plan, then we do expect them to provide them and provide them as explained in their plan, and that they are involving the communities, their city, state, local, tribal partners on how best to execute those. And a description of that is in the plans. It's exercised, and we can always coordinate if additional information is needed. And we really appreciate that support and coordination, but are always happy to help as the SF12 and bridge the gap if more information is needed. Next slide, please. Well, I've thrown, it seems like very little at you and a lot at you at the same time. You can catch me at my next gig. It's like I'll be at the Ha Club on Thursday. Don't forget to tip your waitresses. But all kidding aside, I am always available to answer questions. If I can't answer your question, I'm available 24/7, email, phone call. You can reach out to me, and if I don't have the answer, I'll get it for you. And please take a look, or at least save the supplemental materials that I'm including for easy access, but that is in no way to keep you from contacting me. Happy to help, and I thank you all for listening and for being allowed to present today. Thank you.
Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. That was really good information. For the people joining us, I just want to send a reminder that if you pop your questions in the chat, we'll have a facilitate question and answer session at the tail end of the presentation. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Haley Rich and Shelley Emery with the Oregon Department of Human Services, or DHS as we call them. Our partners over there, thanks for joining us today. They will be discussing considerations for vulnerable or access and functional need populations. So with that, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa and Chris and Allison, for having us. And I'm just going to do a quick check. Can you all see the screen here, the public safety power shutoff?
Yes, you're good to go, Haley.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here on your lunch break, I'm sure. And I am Haley Rich. I'm a social service emergency liaison with the Oregon Department of Human Services, Office of Resilience and Emergency Management. And I'm part of a field team that serves communities. And I'll hand it over to Shelley to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Shelley Emery, and I am actually a member of a staff member of the Statewide Independent Living Council, but I'm also a member of the Disability Emergency Management Advisory Council, and in that capacity have worked closely with Haley's team since the wildfires in 2020. Okay, so I am going to kick this off, I think, unless Haley wanted to lay some groundwork first.
Yeah, sure. So as Shelley mentioned, we are going to be talking about what is referred to in the emergency management world as the access and functional needs population. And the way that FEMA describes that is really broad. That can include really anyone who might need a little additional assistance to keep themselves safe during an emergency. So that might include seniors or elders, young children, people with disabilities, people who don't have a vehicle, people with limited English proficiency. But really today, Shelley and I are going to kind of focus on people with physical and medical needs. And yes, go ahead, Shelley.
Well, I'm going to start off telling a little bit of someone's story, and it's about navigating loss, or navigating the loss of electricity. So this happened during the ice storms that occurred in our area, and I recognize that there's a lot of differences in this situation than public safety power shutoff, but I think there's still some lessons to be learned. And it might help with some decision making. So the person I'm going to tell you about, I'm going to call her Anna, not her real name, but she's someone that had mobility issues, so she used a power wheelchair. She had some breathing issues, so occasionally she would be using oxygen, an oxygen concentrator, and a nebulizer to assist her. She had the assistance of in-home supports here and there throughout the day, getting in and out of bed. She was alone at night. And she also was someone who was catheterized, so had some physical needs for someone to support her at different times during the day. She lived on the 4th floor of an apartment unit, had an elevator and flights of stairs. And she also had done some prep work. She had battery backup for her power chair. She had a few mobile oxygen tanks for her oxygen needs. And she'd built strong relationships with neighbors and had their phone numbers. She also was well connected with state agencies because she'd been on advisory committees and things like that. So she is pretty informed about how a lot of the systems worked. But in this situation, of course, she didn't get forewarning. She knew there was bad weather, but that's common that time of year. And so power goes out, she lost her elevator. She could not physically get in and out of the building. Also, her caregivers were older, had some knee issues, weren't able to climb 4 flights of stairs. She also really didn't expect the power outage to be going on for as long as it did. And over time, her phone battery was declining. She was able to reach out to a neighbor who was able to bring their phone, and she could still call some people. Travel getting to her was an issue in that situation because of the ice. And slowly her oxygen backup started declining. So she tried calling her durable medical equipment provider, and they were closed because of the ice storm. She had their emergency numbers and contacted them, and they were out of state, but they were unable to reach somebody local that could help bring her more oxygen supplies. She called 911 and the dispatcher told her, well, the hospital's just going to oxygenate you like in the immediate and then send you home. So she wasn't getting much response there. They were in the middle of COVID, of course. She could have gone someplace initially that had some power through a generator or something like that if she had known to expect all these things. That's kind of why I'm sharing the story. Finally, she was having difficulty speaking because she was losing the ability to breathe. She contacted the fire department and they finally, or 911, they finally sent the fire department, carried her down those 4 flights of stairs. In the midst of that, her foot got torn up. And so she ended up in the hospital. They were quite busy, so she was in the hallway, not getting oxygenation all the time because they didn't have all the equipment they needed to bring there for her on a constant basis. And a caregiver was finally able to get to her in the hospital to provide some assistance until the power came back on and she was able to return home. So that's a really extreme situation, but I think there are some lessons to be learned about decision points. If she had had a backup power support for her phone, that would have been helpful. And I recognize that some of the services are already changing from that time period because things are always changing in emergency management. But I want to go to the next slide and just talk a little bit about decision-making considerations. So some of the things to think about are a person's access in and out of their living space. Do they have stairs that they'll need to navigate because an elevator is out? Are they alone? Do they have live-in help? Those all make differences. Or do they have care providers that come and go? And are there going to be any transportation issues that will affect their ability to use transportation they typically use? Some types of public transportation in some areas are energy dependent. Also, if someone is actually dependent on an electrical device for critical, life-giving service, that's an issue that they need to think about. Expected length of power shutoffs, the amount of early warning that they will receive, and whether there's also an air quality issue going on or extreme temperature. Those things all play into some of the decision points that will be really important. One size definitely does not fit all. So where we really encourage people to think individually, make their own plan, work with their local power company, their local emergency management department at their county, and their neighbors, their friends who are going to be nearby and able to get to them. And I am going to now hand it off to Haley.
Thank you, Shelley, and thanks to the individual who allowed us to hear her story today. It's a powerful story. And what Shelley just shared with us really highlights how important it is for people to leave early if they think that they need a short-term place to stay during a PSPS or a public safety power shutoff. And I'm going to leave my camera off because I was starting to have some glitches. I may have some connectivity issues happening, but I'll try and come back on here if I'm hearing Shelley a little bit more clearly in a moment. For people with disabilities or complex medical needs, being prepared is really critical. One of the ways to do that is, of course, all of the great emergency practices that I think OSFM and other partners have done on emergency preparedness in past webinars. But for people with unique needs, they may need a different kind of personal go bag or a bug out bag, right? So that list may differ and could include things like a transfer board, extra batteries for hearing aids, battery packs for cell phones so that people can maintain communication with their caregivers and their supports, durable medical equipment and assistive devices that may not fit within the typical emergency kit and may need kind of a separate bag. So those are important things to think about. And of course, keeping informed on really any threats in your local area is super important. So signing up for emergency alerts, which can be done at oralert.gov, is also really, really important. I would say if there's one thing to go away from today is, or one thing that people could take away from today, it would be that if you're not signed up for emergency alerts, or if your loved ones aren't signed up for emergency alerts, help them to do that. And then of course, work with your power companies to make sure that they know that you or your loved one or someone that you serve may need extra assistance during a public safety power shutoff, and that they are power dependent. Shelley also had a really good point before she and I presented, we were having a conversation about this, and folks may also need to work with their landlords about alerts and how those are received for their location or their physical address. A few more considerations. So of course, make sure that you're following official information in your county and learning those resources that are available to you. As Shelley mentioned, it's not a one size fits all when it comes to individual needs or the resources that are available in your area. We also want to make sure that people are staying in touch with their case managers and their service providers, and that their contact information is current, so that if there is a PSPS or another emergency, their service providers can reach out to them and do a wellness call. And that is actually something that a few of our ODHS programs are beginning to do. Programs like adult aging and people with disabilities and ODDS. I see Ash Kane on the call here. She's an emergency manager with ODDS, are beginning to reach out to folks when there's something like a PSPS happening in their area to check on them. And then my team can help support those efforts too, right? Because we know that these incidents don't always happen Monday through Friday, 9 to 5.
All right, need to get my mic on. So people are always encouraged to make their own emergency plans. And I just want to focus on a particular plan for those that have electrically powered medical devices or potentially refrigerated meds. It's so important to focus on those devices, and really suggest people talk to their medical providers for help in building that plan. It's important to understand how to get some extra meds so you aren't always having to get to the end of your supplies. Because before you get new things, if you are at the end of your supplies and an emergency happens, it's very difficult to get those in the midst of an emergency. So talk to your doctor about how you can do that. There's also important information about how long meds can stay at higher temperatures that you want to have, so that you can judge when it's safe to take a medication that you've had during a power shutoff. The Centers for Disease Control have a recommendation that when power is out for a day or more, throw away any medications that should be refrigerated if they have a replacement. Unless the drug's label says something otherwise, that's the general rule. If this is a drug that you are dependent on for life and it has to be refrigerated, then the recommendation is use it only until you can get a new supply, but get that as soon as possible, because the efficacy of the drug will diminish because of the temperature. Having a thermometer that you can monitor refrigeration temperatures can be very useful. And also having some ice on hand all the time and a small cooler in advance of power shutoffs. You never know when you're going to have a prolonged outage. You may need to move to another location, and you may need to take those medications with you. So that can be helpful. Next slide, please. And I'll turn it over to Haley.
Okay, so prepare for alternate power sources. So there are all kinds of really great alternative power sources available today. Some of them are pretty expensive, so they're really mostly accessible right now to people with disposable income. And then there are some great alternatives that are fairly affordable. But definitely those backup batteries are really important for small and large devices. Portable chargers or power banks can also be really helpful. Flashlights are good to keep on hand. And then if folks are using an oxygen concentrator, they may try to have an extra oxygen tank as backup. No power limits for wheelchairs and scooters. So blue sky times, times when we aren't experiencing something like a PSPS, is a good time to maybe conduct a safe to fail experiment where people might want to test it out and see how long their batteries are going to last them. And then of course, considering if folks are capable of using the alternate power source, they may need help from a neighbor or a caregiver to use those things. And then I'm just going to see if you guys can see this. So I have always lived in the wildland urban interface and have been evacuated probably more times than the typical citizen. And I'm a daughter of an electrician. And after the first disaster that I lived through, my dad said, Haley, vehicles are actually a really efficient way to use fuel and to create backup power for yourself. So he bought me this. I don't know if you guys can see that. It's an inverter. It's a 750 watt inverter that hooks up to a battery, my car battery. And I was able to run my cell phone, my laptop, some of those things that I needed to continue to do my work. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that this little tool would work for everyone, but it might work for some folks. Let's see here. And I think that's probably it on battery backup, but let me just look at my notes here. So considering what type of batteries the device uses in advance is important. How many batteries will it take to operate the device? How long will it last on battery power? How do I switch operation of my device from battery to electric power? These are all good things to kind of experiment with in advance and to consider. Shelley, do you have anything else on this one? I know this is kind of a individualized piece here.
Just for power chair users, just think about having a transfer board and potentially a manual chair around if you can possibly have one and keep it. I'm going to go on to the next dice. I'm watching the time. And food storage considerations. These are typical for most people, but I just wanted to mention that oftentimes people who are on limited incomes due to their disability really maybe should think about foods they normally eat and be able to just use them as their emergency stock, and as they eat them, replace them. I'm thinking of canned meats and veggies. Consider though how you will open those things if you have no power. So really give that some thought to make sure you have what you need. Generally, freezers and refrigerators, you're going to want to keep them closed. 4 hours is probably the max for a refrigerator that has no power. A full freezer, they say, should be able to last 48 hours, but check the temperature after the outage, and then throw out food that's been at 40 degrees for more than 2 hours. Also, make sure you build your support system. I'll try to be really quick here. Trusted neighbors and friends, build relationships with them. You may need them, even if you normally have care providers, like in the story of Anna, they always get to you. Have a whistle to signal for help when you need it. Think about transportation resources you might need outside of public transportation that may become unavailable. Keep phone numbers and keep some key ones on paper, because if your phone goes down and you need to use someone else's phone, you still have those key numbers that you're going to need to reach out to people.
Okay, I'm gonna kind of speed through these. They're basic safety tips, so avoid carbon monoxide. So don't use generators indoors and keep them away from windows. Also, in the past, we know that sometimes people use gas stove tops or even ovens for heating in the winter months. That's also a really unsafe practice. Avoid electrical surges when power returns. So make sure to turn off those appliances that could be damaged by surges before that happens, or you can may be able to find a surge protector to protect those items. And then in extreme temperatures, consider going to a community resource center or finding that short-term shelter for yourself or your loved ones.
And I'm just going to suggest some resources. So billing to go kits, there's some disability specific types of kits, like some that you carry on you, some that are at your bedside, some for your car, that you can get through the National ADA network. There's also, we put up Or Alert's website again, but you can just Google Or Alert. Also, general power outage information can be obtained from ready.gov. And also, you know, there's a specific paper that UC Berkeley Disability Lab did on alternative power sources for power chairs and scooters. And so these resources are in the materials that is available from, I guess, I'm not sure how these will be sent out, but you can contact either.
I think Chris and Allison will be sending this PowerPoint out afterwards.
Okay.
And then if you have any questions after this presentation today, we'll have time for questions now, I believe, but here is our contact information, mine and Shelley, and we may not be able to answer your question, but we can probably put you in touch with someone who can and refer you to that, that correct or appropriate agency. And those will also, that contact information will also go out with OSFM, I believe.
Thank you so much, Haley. And Haley, and before we get to questions, we have a quick go back with Lisa Gorsuch. So Lisa, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. I really want to quickly thank Shelley and Haley. This was incredible information, incredibly important, and the partnership that they have extended and the collaboration with OPUC as the coordinator with the energy providers has been amazing, and their folks at all levels, be it local, state, I really view as first responders, right? And supporting life safety, if not saving lives. So I want to thank you. And I want to throw out just quickly a little bit of context. The example provided was amazing. All of the preparation, information, amazing. However, with the topic of public safety power shutoff, I want to keep things in context so that people understand that many things take out power. The ice storm, which please, I want Shelley or Haley or to correct me, that example, was that the February 2021 ice storm that that person experienced those issues? Your example? Okay.
Yes.
Yep. And that was a rough one. That was one of our 1 in 100 year events that we've experienced, like the 2020 wildfires and the June 21 heat dome. And There are many things, like I said, that take out power, winter storms, high wind events that may not actually be a PSPS depending on the time of year, tree or, tree coming down, car hitting a power pole, an animal contact with power, and there's no heads up. There's no advance warning that can be given. PSPS is the one situation where we know that it's going to be shut off and there's advanced coordination that can be done. So I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that. And once power does go out, there's immediate coordination with ESF 12 and then all of our partners, and the companies are good at communicating with the local impacted emergency managers as well. But that just reemphasizes the need to be as prepared as possible. And with regard to folks that have dependencies on electricity, life-saving dependencies, the utilities are only aware of what has been provided to them because of HIPAA laws. They can't ask about that. So they do have a medical certificate program where they have knowledge of folks that are dependent on electricity, or someone can self-identify without even a med cert. But without that, they don't know. And they would have special protocols to reach out directly and support those with those needs, but only those that they're aware of. So I don't want to take up more time. I want people to get to ask questions, but keep that in mind. PSPS is different than a winter storm that takes out power. You're not going to get notification. They don't know where it's going to hit and take out power, and they don't know for how long, because we had 600,000 people out of power. PGE lost more power poles in that February 21 storm than were taken out in Hurricane Sandy on the East Coast, to give some context. So I thank ODHS, ESF 6 for the amazing work, and they're the best partners in the world, and they do so much for Oregon. So thank you.
Thanks, Lisa, and thanks for that context. I think that's really helpful to remind folks that with PSPS there is notice. So it does make it a little bit easier.
I want to echo that as well. We have amazing partner agencies on this call. So thanks again to all of you for helping us do this. I think through the series on certain topics, that through line, certainly the theme of today is preparedness is huge. The most you can do up front to prepare for the bad day is going to equal, a better outcome. So thanks again for sharing the information. All of this helps us promote a resilient and fire adapted community. So good stuff. With that, I am going to turn it back over to Allison Green for a question and answer.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to our presenters. Fantastic information. Whether you're an individual that has functional access needs, you have a family member, you have a neighbor, all of those details are so important to know, so that, again, our communities can be as resilient and prepared for any disaster in Oregon. So I will caveat this. We have 11 minutes left together. And so I'm going to try to get through these questions as quickly as I can. I am also going to drop my email in the chat, so you guys know how to get a hold of me in case there's something we didn't quite get to, or if it's something that pops into your brain later, feel free to email me. I can guarantee I don't know the answer, but I know how to connect with the folks that do. So I'll pop that in and then I'll work through the questions here. So the first question was, and Lisa, I believe this may be for you. Should we expect local PUD to have a shutoff plan or mitigation plan?
Thank you so much. That is a really good question. And again, that refers back to the fact that only 3 of our 41 providers are required per Executive Order 20-04 and through Senate Bill 762, that did require all of the utilities that provide in Oregon, all of the electric utilities, to have a wildfire mitigation plan. But as far as the PSPS rules, those only apply to Idaho Power, Pacific Power, and Portland General Electric. If you are served by a cooperative, a municipality, or a people's utility district, for which we have 6 of those in Oregon, it's very important to know their plan and whether they consider themselves in a high fire consequence area based on not only an ODF or OSFM and or OSFM map and what it looks like on the ground just with foliage and the weather, but where the infrastructure for that electric provider interfaces with that and whether they consider high risk. Areas that may not have high risk, as far as like Pacific Power and PGE, for example, their entire service territories are not PSPS zones. They have areas that are not considered high risk. Not to say that in a weird weather event, there wouldn't be one necessary, but please refer to the materials that I've shared, both links in the presentation and additional supporting details that materials I've provided, and know your company's plan. And if you want to reach out on a specific provider and have me work through what their plan is, I'm happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, the next question is, utilities seem to be using a fast trip strategy, sometimes instead of using traditional PSPS. Does PUC have plans to regulate this type of preventative outage, such as with respect to community and emergency response notifications?
That I'm interpreting the question, and I'll need to be corrected if I'm wrong, that the question is more of a no notice shut off. Can someone confirm, is that what this question is referencing?
I would say, I believe so. Heidi, if you're still with us, maybe if you can confirm that's what you're referring to.
Sure. I'll just unmute myself. I was trying to type it, but not fast enough. Yeah, I'm talking about an enhanced sensitivity type situation where they utilities increase the sensitivity of lines to interruption, and then they have a non-reclosure. And the problem is that the lines still need extensive investigation, inspection before they can be re-energized, and sometimes those outages can be quite extensive based on California's history. So we do have utilities using that strategy in lieu of PSPS, and I if they need to cut power, they need to cut power. But the problem is that I don't believe that the notification to the communities is the same as for PSPS. So we can be in a situation where we don't know that we could lose power because of the enhanced line sensitivity. So I'm not saying that they shouldn't be used. I'm just wondering what the notification process might be and whether or not the PUC is thinking about talking with utilities about that particular vulnerability.
That is an excellent question, and you have a broad knowledge base in terms of understanding going to hot settings or sensitive settings where if we're not in sensitive settings, if something trips a line, it will automatically try to re-energize, and if there's no problem, bring that line back up. What I will say, it gets complicated because those companies that have moved to sensitive settings, and they're going to do so, this sensitive settings were being moved to long before we ever considered or had public safety power shutoffs. That is part of responsibly managing the system, the power system that you own and you're responsible for. So we've had that for years. And now the difference is, to try and get at your question, there hasn't been discussion around, as of yet, rules about notification due to sensitive settings. But an example I would give you, and again, this is where it gets dicey and complicated, that CPI is a Consumer Power Inc. They are cooperative. And during the September 2022 wildfire, or not wildfire, but PSPS event, they were on a watch for PSPS, but then it never came to fruition. They didn't reach the wind speeds necessary to de-energize. They were being very careful. Had they done a PSPS, far more people would have lost power. They did move due to weather to sensitive settings, but that did cause outages that had to be patrolled before they could re-energize for whatever damage was done due to those high winds and potential trees, lines down, etc., that would have been unsafe and potentially ignited a fire, caused other issues. So I'm not sure how well that answers your question, but sensitive settings are not a new practice. It's just something people, I think, are more aware of now with public safety power shutoffs. And in the case of CPI, even if the commission were to investigate and or develop rules, CPI and its other 37 providers that fall under cooperative municipality and PUD would not be subject to those rules. So feel free to follow up with me. My contact information, I'd love to take time and talk to you. I don't want to feel like I'm giving you some brush off answer. I'm happy to pursue this with you individually if you'd like. And I thank you for the great question.
All right, perfect. Thank you all. So real quick, I'm going to go to a question, but I also just want to maybe put a comment and a kudos in here. We did get kind of the direct message that, Haley, to your point, the inverter. One of our participants put spare fuses and changing tools are also very helpful as part of the go bag when inverters are being used. Shout out to all of my electricity nerds. And then also a shout out for thank you for mentioning having a whistle. For folks like, right, if you're trying to be found, something loud like a whistle is great to have in that go bag. So maybe we'll go back to notifications a little bit, and I feel like all of our presenters may have something to weigh in here. How are essentially emergency communications or direct communications being provided to folks that may not be online, that may not have a cell phone? So maybe a little bit more about notification, and our, best practices, things like that for those folks.
I can start with this one. So when we do have advance notice, we like to rely on the community-based organizations and networks that already exist in community to get that message out. So a really good example of this is Meals on Wheels. They go directly to people's homes on a fairly frequent basis and can help emergency managers, utility providers, public health, kind of amplify that messaging to people who are really hard to reach. We also like to tap into other networks, like in the Gorge, there's migrant seasonal farm worker networks that can be tapped into, and community health workers really throughout the state of Oregon that can help us reach some of these folks. And that's all I have. I'm sure Shelley has some ideas too.
Well, I was just going to say that for people who don't have access to the internet or they don't use a cell phone, if they have a home phone, a landline, you can still have friend or family member help get you signed up on Oral Alert and then get those messages on your landline. I know I've seen that in operation, so and done that for folks. So feel free to ask someone for help with that if you need to get signed up.
This is Lisa Gorsuch. I'll just quickly say that prior to power being de-energized, there will be outbound phone calls made that may be of electronic nature for anybody that isn't identified as someone with a high risk without their power. They will get a human to human call. And if they aren't reachable, then they'll be reaching out to me to coordinate with partners like Shelley and Haley and their team to figure out how we might best reach them. But they're also going to, social media doesn't work. And if you're not online for that, but they'll also be press releases. They're going to be on the news. There are every platform that doesn't interfere with life-saving emergency alert capabilities will be used to notify the public. Thank you.
I also want to add, as part of your go bag, especially when we talk about loss of power, a hand crank or battery operated radio can be key because emergency alerts will be blasted out over TV and radio media as well. if their life, safety, and danger.
Excellent point. Thank you.
Okay, so we do have, and to my presenters, I'm going to commit you to something, so hang in there. So right now, we have a few more questions that we didn't quite get to. I want to be respectful of folks' lunch hour and not hold folks here. So for my questions that are in the chat that we didn't get to, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take those and send them to our presenters, so that, you know, we're able to kind of check in on your questions and address them directly with you. Me as the super secret virtual host, I do have your emails. I'm not going to share them with anybody other than to follow up with you on your question. Also, keep in mind, my email is in the chat. If you want to follow up with me offline to connect you to somebody, please, please, please let me know. But we are 2 minutes over. And so really quick, I'm going to make a shameless plug for our last webinar that's coming up next week. For folks that don't know, we have a fire going on in Umatilla County, unfortunately. So fire season is here, but we do have kind of a longer range fire season forecast to finally kind of round out our webinar series. So with that, I want to thank you all so very much for your time. Thank you, huge thank you to our presenters, and then folks that had questions we didn't quite get to, stay tuned and we will be following up with you in the coming days. And the recording will be up in the next 24 hours or so. So if you have a partner, you have a colleague, a neighbor, somebody that couldn't join us, feel free to send them to our webpage and we can have that recording for them. But thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it. And we will be talking to you all soon.
Thank you so much.